Hi guys, welcome back to TV Spoilers. Today I'm going to reveal to you a horrific death before Kane's passing that could shake the city of Goan.
Nothing in Genoa City happens by accident anymore, especially not when Victor has decided to strike. The air around this power war and the whispered corporate maneuvers has been stretched so tight that even the smallest touch could make everything snap. Kane is used to being watched with suspicion, used to negotiations where everyone hides a blade behind their back, but this time he senses something different, a silence that is too clean, too deliberate, as if the city itself has been holding its breath for the moment a man is condemned before he ever gets the chance to defend himself. The rumor of a final negotiation spreads the way only Genoa City rumors do. No one says it outright, yet everyone knows. And the most unsettling part isn't that Victor issued the invitation, but that it arrived wrapped in a near-courteous tone and elegance Victor uses only when he wants someone to walk into the trap and lock the door behind them. Victor chooses a secret location, far from bright offices and hallways filled with listening ears. That privacy feels like a concession and a threat at once. Kane arrives with every calculation he has trained into instinct. He needs to keep the upper hand, read Victor's face, believe that negotiation is still a game with rules, even if those rules are constantly bent by the powerful. On the way there, Kane reminds himself that Victor can be ruthless, but Victor usually worships victory through control rather than through openly dirty tactics. Kane wants to believe that if this is truly a final meeting, it will be the place where two opponents stare each other down and place their terms on the table. He wants to believe it, because if he doesn't, he must accept a far darker truth that Victor never intended to bargain at all, only to deliver a sentence. The moment Kane steps inside, he feels the chill of orchestration. The atmosphere is tense, but not the tense of two men preparing to argue. It's the tension of a room where the outcome has already been decided. Victor doesn't need to raise his voice. He stands with a calm that borders on emotionless, the calm of a man who has reduced his opponent to a problem to be eliminated rather than a person to be debated. Kane still tries to hold his posture, still tries to believe there's a path to leverage, still tries to communicate with his eyes that he came here to end this war in a way that can be survived. But Victor doesn't give him even a second to start the meeting. No extra greetings, no opening line to test the waters. Victor goes straight to the thing Kane isn't ready to face: evidence. Victor abruptly produces documentation of an illegal financial transaction from Kane's past, something kept like a bullet already chambered, waiting for the exact moment to be fired. This is no longer a blow aimed at a company, no longer a fight over market share or boardroom control. It is an attack without violence, yet it lands with physical shock, the kind that makes a heart skip, empties the mind for a few seconds, and then brings every sound back as a ringing roar after an explosion. Kane looks at what Victor has laid out: papers, numbers, trails, and instantly understands the most terrifying part. Victor doesn't merely suspect, Victor knows. And Victor chose the one thing that can destroy Kane in a single snap. Reputation, freedom, future compressed into thin pages that weigh more than any verdict. Kane tries to stay composed, but panic doesn't arrive as screaming. It arrives as cold water running down his spine. He realizes this isn't negotiation at all, but an execution by paperwork. Victor threatens to go public. There's no flourish, no disguise. A single disclosure could turn Kane into a criminal in the eyes of the public, make partners abandon him, and set the legal system in motion to crush him. What makes Kane choke isn't only the risk of arrest or investigation. It's the awareness that Victor has decided to erase him as a human being, not just take the company, not just win. Victor wants Kane removed from the board in a way that ensures he can never stand again. In that instant, Kane understands Victor's cruel rule. When Victor deems someone a threat, he doesn't trim their power, he cuts off their ability to exist in this world with dignity. Kane's anger surges as pure instinctive defense. He realizes he has been lured from the first moment, that the final negotiation was nothing but a polished cover for the real purpose, dragging Kane to a place with no witnesses, no exit, no chance to reshape the story. Kane's fury isn't only aimed at Victor, but also at himself for allowing even a flicker of naive hope. He sees clearly that Victor has crossed beyond the boundaries of ordinary corporate warfare. This is a strike at survival. Kane wants to push back, flip the board, find a weakness in Victor's plan, but every thought crashes into the same wall. Victor doesn't need to prove anything, he only needs to reveal it. He only needs to call the right person, put the right file into the right hands. Only then does Victor grant what he calls a choice, an illusion of choice wrapped in ice. He delivers an ultimatum, forcing Kane to accept every condition if he wants to avoid immediate ruin. The cruelty is that Victor makes Kane sign his own surrender, cut away pieces of his own life in exchange for the privilege of not being destroyed today. Victor isn't hurried because Kane is the one drowning for air. Victor understands that psychology better than anyone. When a person is threatened with losing their freedom, principles begin to wobble. When a person is cornered, they choose breathing first, honor later. Victor uses Kane's survival instinct as a noose. Kane is trapped between two brutal options: submit to Victor or face severe legal consequences. There is no third path. And what hurts most isn't Victor's power, it's the way Victor is savoring control over Kane's every breath. Kane knows that if he bows his head, he will continue living in humiliation, pulled along like a shadow on Victor's leash. But if he refuses, he could lose everything immediately, not only the company, but his entire life. In Kane's mind, visions sprint in every direction: headlines, contempt, handcuffs, doors slamming shut. Yet alongside fear is another force: rage from realizing he is being erased in the most degrading way, not defeated in a fair battle, but broken by a buried sin dragged into the light at the perfect moment. The room thickens with silence. Kane fights not to collapse because he knows Victor is waiting for Kane to lose control so Victor can claim Kane deserves annihilation. Kane wants to say Victor is playing filthy, but he knows those words mean nothing to a man who treats everything as war. Inside Kane, two selves clash: the survivor and the man who refuses to kneel. The survivor whispers, "Sign, swallow the humiliation, buy time." The man who refuses screams, "If you sign today, you will die slowly under Victor's control, and Victor will never stop." Those voices collide until Kane feels split in two, while Victor stands there like a judge who has already written the sentence, waiting only for the defendant to confess. Kane finally grasps something even darker than the illegal file itself. Victor doesn't need to kill anyone to create a murder. He can kill reputation, kill future, kill the ability to stand upright in society. It is the kind of murder that spills no blood, yet makes a person vanish from the world as someone who matters. And Victor's impatience, his determination to finish Kane here, creates a dangerous energy, like a victor too certain of triumph who begins to rush, to push past safe boundaries. Kane looks at Victor and realizes that if Victor has prepared this much, Victor may be willing to go even farther if Kane won't submit. The silence becomes the ticking of an invisible bomb. Kane stands before the ultimatum as if at the edge of a cliff. If he steps back, he falls. If he steps forward, he may be shoved. And while Victor waits for an answer, Kane feels a cold truth forming. Whatever choice he makes will ignite consequences that cannot be reversed. He draws a deep breath, as though preparing to decide his own life, and in that moment Victor's stare is no longer merely a threat, it becomes an absolute warning that if Kane resists, Victor will act immediately. Kane reaches toward the papers as if to sign, but his hand trembles. Fear and fury fuse together, and in that trembling he doesn't even know which decision he is about to make: surrender to survive, or risk everything to preserve the last piece of himself. Victor watches that hesitation with a chill that borders on inhuman, as if he has already calculated that Kane's delay will shove everything out of control in the worst possible way. And when Kane looks up, his eyes no longer belong to a man negotiating, but to a man pushed to the edges that could spark a reckless choice, a misstep. And a consequence no one in this room can undo. Just as outside, a small sound breaks through, as if someone or something has come too close to this secret location, making both Victor and Kane freeze on the same breath, as though the final negotiation has just transformed into something far worse. A moment where one wrong shove could turn this into a true and horrifying killing. Newman Tower has never truly been peaceful, but that day the building carried a different kind of tension, no longer the familiar strain of minds clashing across a conference table, but the heavy, metallic silence that comes right before impact. The corridors were still bright, the carpets immaculate, the glass walls reflecting the cold geometry of power, yet the air felt dense, as if someone had tightened an invisible cord around the city's throat. Victor's summons to Kane did not feel like an invitation to negotiate. It felt like a final roll call, a reminder that in Genoa City no one is allowed to forget who stands at the top. Kane understood that immediately, and still he walked into the tower with the posture of a man who refused to bow, because if he faltered even once, Victor would turn that hesitation into precedent and use that precedent to crush him in every confrontation to come. The tension surrounding the controversial business deal had dragged on long enough to become a matter of pride rather than profit, and the longer it lasted, the deeper it carved into the ego of both men, one who has spent a lifetime issuing commands, and one who has decided he will not be governed by fear. Victor's office at Newman Tower has always been a symbol of dominance. Dark tones, rigid lines, every detail arranged as if the room itself must obey its owner's will. When Kane was ushered inside, he did not rush to explain or defend himself. He observed, breathed, reminded himself that he could not enter as a man asking for mercy. Yet the more he tried to stay calm, the more sharply he felt the difference between two forms of power. Victor's power, built over years until people instinctively step back before they are pushed, and Kane's power, more fragile, forced to be proven again and again by standing upright even when his knees want to fold. Victor offered no polite small talk. He looked at Kane as if Kane were a problem to be disposed of. Even before a single word was exchanged, Victor made the room feel smaller, made the air feel like a sealed box where the oxygen is slowly being drained. Kane knew what Victor wanted: to force surrender, to claim the deal as a trophy, to show all of Genoa City that no one mocks a Newman and walks out untouched. Kane also knew what he wanted: to keep control, to keep dignity, and most of all to keep the freedom to challenge Victor without paying with humiliation. That was the spark, and it only needed one sharp moment to ignite. The argument erupted without the need for specific dialogue, because the shape of it was inevitable. Victor pressed with absolute authority. Kane answered with deliberate defiance. Kane did not merely refuse to yield. He challenged the system Victor represented, as if he meant to prove that the era of people bowing to a name was beginning to crack. He mocked not because he was foolish, but because sometimes mockery is the only weapon left to a man standing before someone who does not understand compromise. Every small smirk, every steady look from Kane sliced into Victor's pride, making Victor feel not simply resisted, but insulted inside his own territory. For Victor, that was unforgivable. He did not only want to win the deal, he wanted to break Kane's will so that everyone watching would learn to retreat before the fight even started. Kane, meanwhile, felt the opposite pressure. The more Victor tried to crush him through sheer dominance, the more Kane feared that if he gave in, he would disappear from the board in the worst way, still alive, yet existing only because his enemy permitted it. Victor's anger did not explode at once. It packed itself down like a hidden current. He is a man accustomed to controlling emotion, accustomed to turning fury into strategy, accustomed to using words and leverage to make others collapse without ever lifting a hand. But that day those layers of control began to fracture under the sensation of being challenged too directly. Kane was not simply pushing back. He was looking Victor in the eye and implying that Victor's power has limits, that there are people who will not be made into victims of the Newman game. That refusal to be afraid was what Victor recognized as dangerous because fear is the foundation on which Victor maintains order. When fear stops working, Victor must either build a new restraint or deliver a shock violent enough to resurrect the old one. And at the peak of the confrontation, instead of continuing to fight with words, Victor let instinct overtake strategy in the bluntest possible way. He suddenly lost control and shoved Kane hard into the wall. It was not only violence. It was the shattering of every unspoken rule the business world pretends to respect, and it happened so fast that Kane only felt his back slam into cold solidity before his mind could fully process what had just occurred. The chef stunned Kane for a single breath, but what truly shook him was the meaning behind it. Victor was not merely trying to frighten him, Victor was marking him. In Victor's world, the message did not need translation. He was willing to cross any boundary, willing to tear away the mask of civility, willing to use force if force was what it took to remind Kane where the line was drawn. A small scuffle followed, not the theatrical kind that drags on, but the brief, brutal collision of egos, a man who lives to impose control against a man who refuses to be controlled. There were sharp movements, sudden impacts, the kind of chaos that turned what was supposed to be a fortress of power into a moment of exposed instability. Kane reacted not because he wanted to become a brawler, but because he could not stand still and be degraded. If he did not resist, he would be admitting that Victor had the right to handle him like property. Yet the more he resisted, the more Kane sensed how quickly this could become something far worse. How every bruise could become evidence and also become an excuse for an even uglier escalation. What made the scuffle truly dangerous was not only the violence, but its public nature. Even though Victor's office sits in a zone people treat as untouchable, Newman Tower still runs on human beings who hear, who see, and who retell. Attention was drawn, eyes caught what mattered. It does not require naming individuals to understand the impact. Witnesses absorbed the image of Victor shoving Kane, absorbed the shock of disorder inside Victor's own kingdom, and carried that image out like contraband. The evidence left behind was not only physical. It was a new collective memory. Victor Newman can snap, Victor Newman can strike. And in Genoa City, a collective memory like that travels faster than any document, because it feeds both curiosity and fear. It forces the city to ask the question people rarely ask out loud. Is Victor entering a phase where he no longer cares about appearances? If so, anyone standing on the opposite side could become the next target, and the instability will not stay contained inside corporate headlines. Kane was shaken, but he refused to fracture. Even with adrenaline roaring through his veins, he forced himself to regain control because he understood the iron rule of fighting Victor. The first person to show panic loses. He straightened as if he were pulling himself and his dignity away from the wall Victor had shoved him into. His composure returned not because the anger vanished, but because he recognized a colder truth. From this moment on, everything he did would be examined through the microscope of rumor. And Victor would try to shape the narrative, so Kane became the provocateur while Victor became the man who was forced to respond. Kane warned of consequences, no dialogue needed, only the hard intent in his gaze. This could not be hidden forever, and if Victor believed violence would silence Kane, Victor was miscalculating. Kane did not want to be a victim, but he also did not want to be dragged into a mud war Victor could always win. Inside Kane, conflict churned. One part of him wanted to hurl his fury straight back at Victor, while another part reminded him that this was Victor's territory. And every second of lost control would be turned into ammunition against him. Victor did not retreat after the outburst. If anything, he doubled down, turning his own loss of control into a statement. He would not step back. He would not hesitate before any obstacle, not even the obstacle of morality or image. For Victor, public violence was not necessarily a weakness. It could be a tool of intimidation. If anyone thought Victor was weakening, Victor would prove in the most frightening way possible that he still had the power to hurt. The deeper danger was that Victor believed absolute power allowed him to define reality itself: who is right, who is wrong, who provoked, who had no choice. That belief made him incapable of fearing consequences the way ordinary people do. And by refusing to apologize, refusing to soften, refusing to restore calm, Victor delivered an even colder message: from now on. This fight is not about a deal or shares, it is about who dares to stand upright in front of Victor and remain standing afterward. News of the scuffle spread through Genoa City like fire catching wind. People did not need every detail, they only needed the core: violence, Victor, Cain, and the implication that power was shifting into a more dangerous shape. Stories were retold, twisted, colored by the storyteller's agenda, yet the heart remained the same: Victor crossed the boundary of words. That single fact reshaped the landscape in silent ways. Some would grow afraid and withdraw from alliances that might place them in Victor's path. Others would see opportunity in the chaos, because empires rarely collapse under a strong enemy. They often crack when they become too confident, too impulsive, too certain they can do anything without consequence. Business conversations grew more unstable, not because of one shove, but because the shove became a crack in the surface of order, and from that crack darker forces can seep out: revenge, recklessness, loss of control, decisions made in rage rather than strategy. Chelsea and Adam watched the development with the cold clarity of people who understand exactly how power fractures. They recognized this as a chance to increase their influence in the fight against Cain, not by imitating violence, but by using the aftershock of violence. When Victor stains his own image, people like Chelsea and Adam can manipulate the narrative to their advantage, isolate Cain further, frame him as the man who provoked Victor into snapping, or make him seem too toxic for partners to stand beside. They did not need to create new events. The opportunity was already there in the way they viewed the moment. In a city where image is currency, a public scuffle is a sudden market drop, and the smartest players know how to buy in at the right time and sell later when the tide turns. For Chelsea and Adam, this was proof the ground under Cain's feet was starting to tremble, and they only needed to position themselves so the tremor became a fall. Lily, however, received the news with something far more personal than curiosity. Her response was anxiety, because she understood how complicated the Newman orbit is and how relentlessly Victor can turn conflict into a war with no end date. She worried for Cain's safety, not only because he had been shoved, but because Cain was now standing too close to a fire that could consume everything around it. The relationship between Cain and the Newman world has always been tangled: defiance, old wounds, connections that cannot be severed cleanly. This news forced Lily to confront a painful question. What is Cain truly fighting for: justice, the company, or the wounded pride Victor just carved into him? And it forced another fear to surface, quiet but relentless. If Victor is willing to use violence in a place as public as Newman Tower, what happens when there are no witnesses? Lily felt the situation sliding downhill, as if a door had been opened and behind it waited a phase where the old rules no longer apply. That physical attack was therefore not just a burst of anger. It was a signal of a new era, one marked by violence and instability in the business world, where the line between boardroom and battlefield begins to blur. And no one can be sure whether victory will be decided by contracts or by intimidation. Cain left Victor's office with something altered in his eyes. He understood that from now on he would not only have to outthink Victor, but also protect himself from the recklessness of a man who refuses to be challenged. Victor remained behind with something altered in himself as well. He had allowed anger to override strategy, and once that happens, a man either regains control through even greater force or slides deeper into domination at any cost. Genoa City watched and began to wonder whether this was evidence Victor was losing control, or evidence he was entering his most ruthless phase because he no longer believes he has time to play civilized. The hook is this: as Cain tries to steady his breathing and map his next move, he realizes the scuffle at Newman Tower was not an ending, but an opening. Victor crossed the line in public once, and once a boundary is broken, it rarely returns intact. The rumor spreads so quickly it stops being only Victor versus Kane and becomes a signal to the entire city that violence has entered the game. And just as Kane tells himself he can use the incident as leverage, a colder thought presses in: Victor is not the kind of man who retreats when he is cornered. He is the kind of man who pushes harder to prove no one can corner him. In a city where pride matters as much as money, Kane understands he has inflicted a public wound on Victor's ego, and public wounds demand payment. So when Kane finally steps away from the tower believing he has survived with evidence and caution on his side, he feels a different kind of weight in the air, an unmistakable sense of being watched. A footstep's time to precisely. As if someone is waiting for a single moment of vulnerability to turn a public scuffle into something irreversible, leaving the most terrifying question hanging over Kane and over all of Genoa City. If Victor struck with witnesses present, where will he stop the next time no one is looking? On our TV Spoilers channel, I always seek content inspiration for each video by compiling short video clips to analyze and offer my personal opinions. This channel specializes in analyzing, theorizing, and discussing plot points in the Young and the Restless series from the perspective of a longtime fan. Through this, viewers can gain deeper, more objective, and more interesting perspectives. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest news about the Young and the Restless series.